Stop! Hey, he's got a gun! Shots fired, I've been hit!
In the heat of the moment, when armed robbers and dangerous offenders hit the streets, police officers sometimes face no choice but to draw their weapons. These criminals, often indifferent to the consequences, are ready to kill or be killed. Yet, officers stand prepared to counteract such threats with decisive action. Join us as we explore 15 gripping instances where officers, caught on video, had to fire shots to uphold the law. Our first case takes us to August 1, 2017, when 25-year-old Miguel Salas found himself at the center of a dramatic and unforeseen confrontation with law enforcement. It all began with what seemed to be a routine investigation. A 911 call reported a stolen phone, which had been tracked to the vehicle Salas was in. Las Vegas police officer Nelson and his partner approached Salas, who was still inside his truck, asking for his ID and requesting that he step out of the vehicle. Salas, adamant about his innocence, refused to comply, setting the stage for a tense standoff. As the officers continued their attempts to de-escalate the situation, Officer Nelson decided to call for backup, anticipating a potential escalation. What followed was something no one could have predicted. In a sudden and violent turn, Salas reached for a Glock 23 beside his right leg and opened fire, hitting both officers. Officer Nelson took a bullet to the chest, but fortunately, his bulletproof vest prevented serious injury. His partner, however, was struck on his work belt, avoiding critical harm. Despite the officers' injuries, they returned fire. Salas was fatally shot in the head and died instantly. Officer Nelson, who had been with the department since 2009, was placed on paid administrative leave while the incident was thoroughly investigated. This unexpected and tragic outcome is just the beginning.
The 730-mile journey of fraternal betrayal. They say family comes above all else, but for one man, this bond meant nothing as he drove over 700 miles with the intent to kill his brother. This harrowing tale begins with Jeffrey Roberts, who traveled 730 miles from his home in California to his brother Scott's front door. When Scott answered, he greeted his brother warmly.
Hey, what's up? What are you doing? Come to the case, we came by to see Mom.
Unaware of the dark intentions behind the visit. The brothers had been estranged for years, a fact unknown to Scott as he welcomed Jeffrey onto his porch. What followed was shockingly brutal. After just 30 seconds of seemingly benign conversation, Jeffrey pulled out a pistol and fatally shot his brother, a chilling echo of the biblical story of Cain and Abel. The violent scene was captured on home security footage depicting the cold-blooded murder. The horror didn't end there. A neighbor, alarmed by the sound of multiple gunshots, quickly called 911. Meanwhile, Jeffrey continued his rampage. He shot his sister-in-law and set road flares inside the house, igniting a fire that quickly spread. The scene was one of chaos and destruction by the time the police arrived. A fierce gunfight ensued, ending with Jeffrey's death. Amidst the tragedy, there was a glimmer of hope. Scott's sister-in-law survived the attack and is now on the path to recovery. The fatal encounter in Fairfax County. In Virginia's Fairfax County, an officer noticed a U-Haul truck with possibly stolen license plates, unaware of the imminent danger. When he stopped the driver at a gas station, he had no idea how perilous the situation would become. The officer initiated a conversation, attempting to address the issue of the potentially stolen plates, but the driver refused to cooperate. Instead, he lunged for the officer's gun, sparking a desperate struggle. The officer pleaded with the driver to release the weapon, but his requests were ignored. The intense struggle continued, with both men grappling for control of the firearm. Amidst the chaos, the suspect managed to get back into the truck and put it in reverse. As the situation escalated, backup officers arrived on the scene. A brief pursuit ensued, ending at a nearby McDonald's, where a gunfight erupted between the suspect and the officers. The suspect, identified as 38-year-old Brandon Lang, was shot during the exchange and died at the scene. The officer sustained minor injuries and required medical attention, but was fortunate to have survived the encounter. Knife attack on Interstate 75. Our next gripping incident involves a man who pulled a knife on a police officer, leading to a tense and dangerous confrontation. On March 29, 2016, 46-year-old Javier Pablo Alemán was walking alone along Interstate 75, west of Cincinnati, when he caught the attention of Glendale police officer Josh. Conducting what he believed to be a routine check, Officer Josh had no idea the peril he was about to face. When approached, Javier identified himself as Carlos, a false name intended to mask his true identity. Unbeknownst to Officer Josh, Javier was a fugitive, wanted for the murder of his 51-year-old roommate, Victor Adolfo Serrano, in Baltimore. Suspicious of Javier's evasiveness and lacking a proper ID, Officer Josh asked him to accompany him to the police cruiser for further investigation. In that critical moment, Javier's demeanor shifted dramatically. He suddenly drew a large knife and lunged at Officer Josh, demanding to be shot. Reacting in self-defense, Officer Josh fired a round, striking Javier in the abdomen. Despite his injury, Javier continued to threaten the officer, shouting that he should be killed or that he would kill the officer. Officer Josh urgently called for backup as the situation escalated. Even with the arrival of additional officers, Javier refused to comply with commands, repeatedly advancing toward Officer Josh with the knife. The standoff became increasingly tense, with Officer Josh and his colleagues persistently ordering Javier to stay down and keep his distance. More than 8 officers eventually arrived at the scene. Despite their repeated commands, Javier, wounded and defiant, continued his aggressive behavior. The confrontation finally ended when officers subdued him with a stun gun and took him into custody. Officer Josh, acting in self-defense, was not prosecuted for the shooting. However, Javier was charged with attempted murder due to his violent actions. Off-duty officer fights back. While some incidents involve surprise attacks on officers during routine assignments, others are brazen daylight robberies by criminals willing to risk everything for their ill-gotten gains. Such was the case in São Paulo, where daylight thefts had become a common occurrence. These thieves, aiming to rob a family in broad daylight, were unaware that their intended victim was more than capable of fighting back. On a fateful day in August 2023, a man and his family were returning home on foot from Diadema, São Paulo, after a shopping trip. As they made their way back, the father noticed 2 strangers approaching on a motorcycle. This man, an off-duty police officer, quickly recognized the threat. Without hesitation, he drew his service weapon, prepared to defend his family from the impending robbery. Security cameras captured the intense moment. Dressed in a Brazilian national team jersey and flip-flops, the officer's actions seemed more fitting for a police mission than a casual family outing. His wife and daughter, reacting to the danger, dove to the ground to avoid the bullets. The peaceful walk had rapidly transformed into a chaotic, daylight gunfight. As shots rang out, the would-be victim turned pursuer, chasing the fleeing criminals who were now desperate to escape. The security footage showed the officer sprinting after the suspects until he disappeared from view, while his terrified family remained huddled in a corner. Witnesses to the attempted heist, drawn by the commotion, provided crucial details to the police, describing the attackers, their motorcycle, and the 6 gunshots that echoed through the São Paulo neighborhood. Despite the gunfire, no one was injured. Local media reported that police searched nearby health clinics for any of the offenders who might have sought treatment for gunshot wounds, but their search turned up empty. And the case of Giovanna Kelsey McCreary. Another dramatic incident involving a police shooting was captured on camera, this time featuring armed citizens firing at officers.
One such case is that of 24-year-old Giovanna Kelsey McCreary. On July 8, 2020, police responded to a report that Giovanna was behaving erratically and had discharged a firearm. When officers arrived, they found her near a hotel parking lot on Black Canyon Highway in Phoenix, Arizona, and quickly approached her. The officers asked Giovanna if she possessed a gun or had fired any shots. She denied ever owning or using a firearm, hoping her denial would end the encounter and allow her to leave. However, the police were not convinced and proceeded to search her belongings for verification. In her bags, they found illegal substances and ammunition, contradicting her claims. Additionally, they discovered Giovanna had an active misdemeanor arrest warrant, prompting them to arrest her immediately. As officers attempted to handcuff her, Giovanna resisted and fought back. In a desperate move, she reached for a gun at her waist and fired at the officers before attempting to flee. The officers pursued, and in the ensuing chaos, drew their firearms and shot her, bringing her down. Fortunately, no officers or bystanders were injured during the confrontation. Giovanna was taken to the hospital in critical condition but survived her injuries. Heroic off-duty cop foils armed robbery at ice cream shop in Uruguay. On November 29, 2023, a dramatic blend of family life and armed robbery unfolded in Uruguay, specifically in the Sayago area of Montevideo, during a quiet Sunday evening. A father and his child had innocently visited a local ice cream shop to enjoy a pleasant end to their weekend. Little did they know, two armed thieves would target the establishment. Upon their arrival, the robbers brazenly brandished their pistols, intending to intimidate patrons and staff. The father, unbeknownst to the robbers, was an off-duty police officer. Reacting swiftly to the imminent threat, he took decisive action. With a series of precise point-blank shots, he disabled one of the robbers and effectively thwarted the attempted heist. The robbers quickly realized, from his attire and skillful response, that they had underestimated their target. Their decision to target a skilled marksman who happened to be enjoying a quiet family outing turned out to be a grave miscalculation. Amidst the chaos, the child remained remarkably composed, continuing to enjoy his ice cream as if nothing had happened. A faint smile of admiration crossed his face, possibly in response to his father's swift and courageous intervention. Despite the shock of witnessing such a harrowing event, the child was unharmed and able to savor his dessert in safety. The incident was promptly reported to the Sayago police station around 11 p.m., where the responding officer filed a detailed report. According to the officer's account, one of the assailants sustained injuries inside the establishment, while his accomplice managed to flee the scene. Miraculously, despite the exchange of gunfire during the intense confrontation, no innocent bystanders or additional victims were harmed. Further investigation by law enforcement revealed troubling details about one of the attackers. It was discovered that he had a criminal history involving homicide and firearms trafficking, adding a chilling context to the brazen robbery attempt. The injured suspect, unable to escape due to his injuries, awaited medical assistance on the pavement before being transported to a local hospital for treatment. Despite the severity of his wounds, he survived the encounter and would face multiple serious charges stemming from his criminal record following medical recovery. Police officer shot in hand during traffic stop altercation. Another dramatic incident was captured on camera, depicting a tense confrontation between a police officer and a group of citizens. The police had pulled over a car containing two men and a woman. Concerned that the driver might attempt to flee, the officer instructed the driver to turn off the engine and place the keys in a visible spot as soon as he approached the vehicle. Shortly after, the officer directed the front seat passenger to stop rummaging through his pockets. Detecting the smell of marijuana emanating from the car, the officer requested the passenger to step out.
Why? I told you to. Step out.
The driver admitted to smoking marijuana but resisted the officer's order to exit the vehicle. Both the driver and the passenger were uncooperative, and when the officer attempted to open the car door from the inside, the situation took a violent turn. Unexpectedly, the officer was shot in the hand by one of the suspects, and his police radio was also struck by gunfire. Reacting quickly, the officer took cover behind his patrol vehicle, dropping his weapon in the process. He managed to retrieve his handgun from the ground and attempted to return fire, but his gun jammed due to his inability to grip it firmly because of the wound to his hand. Despite the malfunction, the officer continued to fire, fearing further shots from inside the car. In the midst of this chaos, the officer called for backup. The reinforcements arrived promptly, and the occupants of the car were apprehended. Routine traffic stop turns violent. On May 13, 2017, Douglas County Deputy Brad Prue pulled over a suspect, identified as 26-year-old Dayan Marcus Rivas Maestas, near County Line Road and Santa Fe Drive. What began as a routine traffic stop quickly escalated into a life-threatening situation. As the deputy approached the vehicle, the driver suddenly got out and charged at him with an unloaded rifle. Deputy Prue, taken by surprise, fell to the ground and fired 2 shots, striking Rivas Maestas in the arm. The immediate threat and the deputy's swift reaction underscored the intense danger he perceived. Despite his fall, Deputy Prue managed to get back on his feet and held Rivas Maestas at gunpoint until backup arrived to assist in the arrest. Fortunately, Deputy Prue was unharmed during the incident. Rivas Maestas, on the other hand, was bleeding and was transported to the hospital for treatment. Once released from the hospital, he was taken into custody and charged with first-degree assault in Douglas County Jail. Arizona Supermarket Incident. On June 14, 2020, a disturbing incident unfolded at an Arizona supermarket when a visibly intoxicated John Brusea began brandishing a knife and threatening people. Alarmed by his behavior, a call was made to 911, reporting that a man was outside the supermarket assaulting customers and menacing anyone in sight. When the police arrived, Brusea decided to confront the officers, brandishing his knife menacingly.
Put the knife down! Shut up! Put the knife down!
Despite repeated commands to drop the weapon, he refused to comply and continued to resist the officers' attempts to de-escalate the situation. Fearing for the safety of the public and themselves, the officers were forced to take action. In an attempt to stop the immediate threat, they fired at Bruce, striking him. Fortunately, the shot was not fatal, and Brusea, a 55-year-old man, survived the encounter. Following his recovery, John Brusea was charged with aggravated assault, a sobering conclusion to a tense and potentially deadly confrontation. The attempted escape of Frederick Goss. This next case demonstrates the perilous situations law enforcement officers often face. On October 26, 2021, in Mount Vernon, Illinois, Frederick Goss was being tried for armed robbery after allegedly robbing a convenience store and exchanging gunfire with the police. Despite being confined to a wheelchair due to injuries sustained during the gunfight, Goss was determined to escape justice. As a corrections officer escorted him to the local courthouse, standard procedure required removing the handcuffs to allow Goss to maneuver his wheelchair. The officer, showing a willingness to assist, adjusted the foot supports of the chair. Seizing what he believed was the perfect opportunity, Goss attempted to grab the officer's gun from its holster. However, his attempt failed, causing him to fall out of the wheelchair. A violent struggle ensued on the ground, with both men crashing into the nearby car. Amidst the chaos, Goss managed to gain control of the firearm and, despite his injuries, struggled to his feet and pointed the gun directly at the officer's face. In a moment of high tension, a second officer arrived and, assessing the immediate threat, opened fire on Goss. The timely intervention saved the officer from serious injury and prevented a potentially fatal shooting. Goss survived the potentially lethal shooting, while the officer involved received minor medical attention. The deadly confrontation with Martel on an abandoned road. When Chicago police discovered a man dozing off in his SUV on July 26, 2018, he claimed he was just taking a quick nap. The officer needed to check if he was under arrest or had any outstanding warrants, but the man's story quickly began to unravel. When asked for his name, he provided one, but the officer couldn't find any record of it in the database of valid driver's licenses.
King Henry Lincoln 4596. King Henry Lincoln 4596.
Suspicious, the officer asked for a form of identification. Almost immediately, the man pulled a gun on the officer, triggering a desperate struggle for control of the weapon. The officer fought valiantly, fearing for her life as the situation escalated. When backup arrived, they found a frantic struggle still ongoing, with the officer pleading for her life. The backup officers moved in and neutralized the threat with a single shot, taking down the suspect, Martel. Investigations revealed that Martel had been high and was wanted in Pennsylvania for the gruesome murder of an elderly man just a few days earlier. By 5 in the morning, police understood why Martel had been hiding on an abandoned road, leading to the fatal confrontation. Escalation in Valdosta. In Valdosta, Georgia, on May 28, 2022, officers responded to a call from a manager at a Family Dollar store regarding a suspected shoplifter. Upon arrival, they immediately recognized the suspect as Demetrius Brinson, known from previous theft incidents. Demetrius proceeded to make a series of poor decisions, seemingly believing he could evade capture. Despite his efforts, officers deployed a K-9 unit and began searching the neighborhood, eventually locating him. Following his arrest, emergency medical services, EMS, were called to assess Demetrius and provide aid to his distressed mother, who may have suffered a panic attack during the incident. The situation could have been avoided had Demetrius not fled from the officers. Now he faces multiple charges, including aggravated assault against an officer, attempted removal of a weapon from a public official, and obstruction of law enforcement officials. After receiving medical clearance, Demetrius was transported to the county jail for booking, where he awaits further legal proceedings. Ohio police encounter turns physical. This next case further demonstrates that wrestling with a police officer is never a good idea. In Ohio, law enforcement officer Stacy Wright pulled over 64-year-old David Kubek on suspicion of speeding along Lost Nation Road in the Willoughby neighborhood of Cleveland. When asked for his license, Kubek refused to cooperate, choosing instead to complicate the situation by getting out of his car. Officer Wright instructed him to sit down, but Kubek defied her orders and began to struggle with her.
Have a seat.
I'm not sitting. I'm not sitting!
Back off!
As the confrontation intensified, it became clear that Kubek was gaining the upper hand. Fortunately, backup soon arrived, and several Good Samaritans joined in to assist, ultimately subduing Kubek and pinning him to the ground. During the struggle, Officer Wright sustained minor injuries. David Kubek was subsequently charged with assault, resisting arrest, speeding, and failing to use a seatbelt. Desperate struggle in Cincinnati. In June 2016, Cincinnati police detained 27-year-old Thomas Robinson on suspicion of killing one young man and injuring another. Faced with the grim reality of his situation, Robinson saw only one way out. As he sat in an interrogation room, an officer approached to remove his handcuffs. Robinson's eyes quickly fixed on the officer's gun, and he seized the opportunity to make a desperate move. In a frantic struggle for the firearm, more officers rushed in and deployed tasers to subdue Robinson. Amid the chaos, Robinson begged the officers to kill him. Thankfully, despite the intense struggle and presence of a firearm, no one was fatally shot. Robinson was ultimately subdued and kept in custody, forced to face the consequences of his actions. What are your opinions on these startling incidents? Do you think the suspects received appropriate consequences, or do you believe the situations could have been managed differently? Share your thoughts in the comments section below.